Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! Hello everybody, it's George the Antique Nomad, and welcome to May's Level 2 bonus video. I am so excited to bring this to you. It is always a pleasure to look for 20 interesting items to talk about and feature and put up on eBay auctions so that everybody has a chance to see how they do in the marketplace. My Level 2 and Level 3 members get early access to this, and after watching this, if you're not a Level 2 or Level 3 member and you think you'd like to get in on this right when this video drops, please check out the join button or the membership links in the description below, and you can find out more about how to do that. But I'm thrilled to bring this to everybody. Eventually everyone gets to see it, and I really enjoy being able to share information and show some things I think are special and interesting that collectors will really enjoy. We talk a lot about resellers in the YouTube vintage community, but the truth is we only have resellers because we have collectors. If it wasn't for people loving and being serious about wanting these better and more interesting things, we wouldn't have a reason to buy and sell them. So thank you all who are collectors, myself included. I think everybody who is a reseller started out as a collector as well. So we all share each other's passion for this, and it's just so much fun to bring this to you. If you are seeing this early access, it means that these items are dropping on eBay listing while you watch. And for anybody, you can hit the links to the items in the description below and go right to the item. And if it's still available, you're welcome to bid, or you can put a watch on it if you're just curious to see how it does. A lot of the reason I do these is to show how things are selling in the marketplace now. And we use eBay auctions for that because it's a good way to get a snapshot over a 10-day period of what the current market is. Our first item is a very pretty piece, and it is a Roseville white rose teapot. I put a Hull pottery piece on last month, and friends of mine said, "Oh, Hull pottery, who buys that anymore?" And I said, "People collect it, it's wonderful stuff." And it was a great piece, and it went to a viewer, and she was thrilled. So now I have a Roseville piece. Same story. Roseville may have been more expensive and more widely collected 20 or 30 years ago, but it still has a lot of adherence. The white rose pattern came out in 1940, right before the Second World War, and it was a little different because it had a very simple top, which I actually think is rather nice. No knob, no finial, because it has this great loop handle, and so they wanted to keep a space for you to actually take this out to the table. It is marked on the bottom very clearly, as all the original Roseville is, from this era. Roseville USA 1T. Frank Farrell was the designer of all of their floral lines, and he liked to mix these interesting sort of textured and in some cases very Art Deco backgrounds, Art Deco shapes like this handle, with this naturalistic look. And that's what made it very, very, very popular. It became very collectible in the 1980s because people remembered it and had nostalgia for it, and they still do. I think it's a very pretty piece personally. There were 56 pieces in the white rose line, including there would have been a cream and sugar you could get with this. There would also have been vases and baskets and bowls and window boxes and probably a wall pocket depending on the line. Very pretty. This came in blue, pink, and brown. I've always been partial to the blue because I think the green really contrasts with it well. This one is starting at only $79. There was a time that these would have sold for a few hundred, and some of the tea sets still do, but I think this one is probably closer to about the 100 to 150 range, so we'll see what the market thinks about that. The next item I have for sale this month is the only paper ephemera item that I brought, and it is this. You may have seen it in a previous video because I did take it to a show or two, but because it's somewhat delicate, I didn't want it to get damaged, and it always ended up in the back of the space where people really couldn't see it. So I decided it was time to put it online because I can show people the wonderful illustrations. There's the back. It was published by Azemard Cuisines in Nimes, France. I'll try not to massacre the French, but basically it says it is a general factory of products of terracotta. Terracotta meant burnt earth, or cooked earth specifically. And what it means is that this company made lots of earthenware house ornaments and sculptures. And I think that this is just the neatest little catalog. I'm going to open it here. You know, it's over 120 years old, so we're going to be fairly gentle with it, but it's intact and in good shape. It's got one colored in place with the vases of pottery for flowers. But then, when you get into the next thing, they show what most of these companies started with, which were very standard pipes and bricks and things, but then they immediately go into some really wonderful house ornaments. And that's what I think is so special about these. Look at these wonderful columns that they have here, for example. Just so many different shapes and sizes and styles. And this is in the Art Nouveau era, but this clearly is from the 1890s because you see a lot of neoclassical and traditional designs in this as well. It's not completely heavily Art Nouveau. Look at the baluster rails, for example, for your porch rails, and those wonderful columns. Let's see what else we can show you in here. It's just a neat book. I think it's 16 pages total. They even have a whole page of vases. Ooh, let's be careful there. There's vases, and then I'm going to show you one more page. For the rest of this, you'll just have to purchase it if you want to see the rest, but this one has all sorts of statues, religious and otherwise, for the garden, all made of terracotta. I think it's just the neatest catalog, and I thought it would be something that somebody might actually buy because they had an interest in the design, but also because most of these things are long out of production, are not things that we can find anymore, but these would be great items if you were someone who casted items in ceramics, for example. You could use these and probably scale them and use them as designs. I thought it was just really a fun and interesting read. I'm only starting it at $9.99, and I'm not putting a buy it now on it because I just want to see what the market is for that. Old catalogs can be surprising. My guess is that it could sell for as much as $45 or $50. Of course, I'm a fan of Venetian and Murano glass, and this one appears to actually be Murano. It is the long-necked bird. I'm going to step back so you can see the whole thing because he's about, gosh, let me look. He's about 15 inches tall. And we see a lot of these birds made in Venice and on the island of Murano in the 1950s and 60s. It was a popular style, and they somewhat vary in terms of quality. And I thought this one was a little better, which is why I chose it. The reason I thought it was a little better, first of all, it's got a lot of gold in it. And then it has this interesting sort of teal blue contrast. These are colors that would have been very popular in the mid-1960s, which is when I expect this to herald from. It's done a little more deliberately because the birds were something that was more commonly done and maybe didn't have as much detail for a relatively new glass blower. This is something that a lot of the apprentices and the newer blowers would have been making at this time, and that's why you see variations in quality. See the eye there, see the way that they were very careful. The beak just barely does not touch the bottom, so these are not fused here actually. You could, if you tried really hard, you could pull them apart, you'd probably break it. But the eye is a nice, fairly round eye. The foot is well done. And this spiral foot with this pattern is definitely something we associate with Murano and Venetian glass as opposed to something made elsewhere in the world. The feet are good, there's no chips or cracks, and I just thought the color of this was what really made it something different. And so this one is going to go online now. I believe we're starting it at just $45, and we're going to see where the market goes from there. My guess is that it's probably worth between $80 and $100. In the 1970s and 80s, before someone foolishly started applying his name to all sorts of non-related items, Pierre Cardin was a high-end fashion name, and that is the Pierre Cardin logo. Pierre Cardin was an interesting person, very avant-garde. He loved geometry in terms of geometric design, and you can see that in these wonderful cufflinks that I have for sale here. Cufflinks were very popular in the 1970s, and there are people wearing them again because they just make a nice finished look with an outfit. And you can see, I'll hold these a little closer, that these have, in Pierre Cardin's typical style, they are brass with an inlay of pave. It's some sort of a ground, I think ceramic, that is laid in here, or it could be glass. It's really hard to tell the way it's fused in. But they're very neat. I'll hold it up close where you can really see that it does have the typical arches. That is definitely part of his style. He was the guy who came up with the bubble dress, and it was $24 for these originally, which is kind of funny because we're starting them at $24. So we're actually going to start the bidding at what they cost new 40 some years ago. He just died in December of 2020 at the age of 98. And yes, he was operating in Paris and New York, as the box said. He worked with Schiaparelli, he worked with Dior, but Balenciaga, that was sort of the group that you wanted to work with if you were apprenticing and trying to become a big designer. And Balenciaga refused him, and so he started his own dress store in Paris. He came up with the bubble skirt. He loved big geometric patterns. He did a lot of things that were really fun and ahead of their time. He even designed the interiors for AMC Javelin cars in the 1970s. You could get a special edition. They're rather valuable now. They're hard to find, and they had these really crazy striped, upholstered interiors. Really a good designer, no longer with us. I think these are interesting for a whole lot of reasons, as was Pierre Cardin. And so we're going to put these up at the original $24 price and see if there's been any appreciation over the last 40 years. My guess is that there has. I think that these are likely to sell somewhere in the 35 to 40 range, but we will just see. I have had the pleasure over the last few years of selling a very large collection of royal Gouda, or as the Dutch say, Gouda, and it is a wonderful bunch of ceramics with a great history that was made over about a 60-year period from about the 19-teens to the 1960s. This is a later example. These are likely to be maybe as late as the 1950s, and I think they're a wonderful pair of hand-painted candlesticks. And I like that the front carries over the design, but you can turn them around, and if you want to look at something different, you can change it up by looking at this side of the candle. And I always figured that something that's detailed all the way around is a little more special than something that's only decorated on one side. It's just a hallmark of quality. All of this painting was done by hand. There were lots of little factories in Gouda. This particular one was made by the Bertino factory. So you see Bertino, Art Pottery, Royal Gouda, Holland, all the different marks. And I think this is really neat. It just has a lot of detail. You can tell that they were very careful about the painting. They got this nice anemone flower with a little stippling in the middle. It's very good quality ware. I like the fact that these candlesticks have a little bit of height. There's a lot of low candlesticks, and to find something medium like this so that it really shows on the table is a little bit more special as well. So I think these are rather nice. Post-war, we believe, probably 1940s or 50s, near the end of the production there. For what they are, I think they are actually relatively inexpensive. We're starting them at $29, and I think my buy it now is $45. If they were a little older and by a more famous company from Gouda, they'd be quite a bit more expensive. So I honestly think they're rather a good deal for what they are. And we'll see who agrees with that. I have a couple of things from Miami in this sale, and the first one is this really wonderful lucite purse. I think this is the first time I've put a lucite purse for sale on eBay because I sell them so well at my real world shows. I usually just save them for that or my mall space in Florida where they sell well. But I got this one on my travels back from the West Coast, and I just thought it was really neat. It's got a lot of things going for it. First of all, the condition is very good. Feet are all there. This is by a company called Charles Kahn in Miami. When these came out in the mid-50s, they originally were introduced by Willardi, I believe, in New York. When the winter season came and the women from New York came down with the lucite purses, it really took off in Florida, and all of a sudden all these Miami makers started making them too. It just fit the era, the modernist lifestyle. One thing about Charles Kahn is he tended to do these metallic colored things, which is a little more interesting than just clear. And then he'd do the clear waffle pattern in this case on the top and the sides. There's no cracks or scratching on this. If you see a piece that's not marked, Charles Kahn always did this clasp with the ball between the other two balls. It's very important to hold up the purse by the handle and make sure it doesn't flop open, because over time these could wear to the point where they wouldn't hold the purse shut anymore, and then you really just can use it as a shelf sitter because it won't stay shut to use. There is the Charles Kahn label in it. That is where you usually find the labels on lucite purses, if they have any. Oftentimes they've worn out, sometimes they were never applied. You'll notice just a tiny bit of corrosion on the hinge. There was a little bit more greening, but I used white vinegar, and it all came right off except right on the rivet points there. That's a little bit hard to get to. Probably with a little scrubbing it might do better. But in any event, I thought it was a great piece. I'm very happy to have it for sale here. I'm starting it off $75. If someone gets it for that, they're getting a great deal. And if they bid it up to the buy it now price, well, that's around $115, which is what these actually typically sell for. This next piece has a personal meaning to me because this piece is Pilgrim's Cameo glass. And it's a very pretty piece. This is considered a 3-color cameo because originally when they're made, and it will be hard to see because the clear coat is so thin, but there's a clear coat over the white over the cranberry, and then they have to carve back to create all this design. So they have to carve off most of the clear coat and the white to get to the cranberry and create this wonderful leaf design. This one came out in the late 1980s, and the reason that I know that is because we were involved with an art glass store that represented the Kelsey Murphy Cameo glass for Pilgrim, and because of that, we ended up opening a factory outlet store in Centralia, Washington for Pilgrim Glass's regular production lines. One of the reasons Kelsey Murphy, who is quite an artist in her own right, one of the reasons she liked working with Pilgrim is because they were a production factory. Even though she could have done this in her own studio as very small production, which it mainly was small production anyway, she was able to have access to 14 tankfuls of different colored glass because of working with Pilgrim glass. When Pilgrim finally closed in the early 2000s, she did a little bit of work with Blanco for the same reason. She and her partner, Robert Bonkamp, when I met them, they were, and I believe still are, living in West Virginia, and they were somewhere near Cerrito, where Pilgrim glass was made. They lived in a very pretty farmstead off in a holler, actually, had some pretty interesting neighbors, but it was a wonderful place for them because they could do a lot of their design work. Robert was an artist and a machinist in his own right, and so he could do a lot of this stuff where they could do prototypes and things and then take them to the factory. Once the factory got them, then she worked with a very, very small group of glass blowers, including a friend of mine's son, who's now a glass blower in Centralia, who apprenticed with her. And then they would send back an artist proof, and this one is an artist proof. So this was the first one made so that she could look at this and say, yes, this is how this is supposed to look, you've done it correctly, and we can put this in production. And she liked this one, and she approved it for production, and they did put it into production, and it was rather popular. It sold for about $300 new. It should be worth about $300 now. Because these are art pieces, because they're vintage now, because Pilgrim Glass is out of business, there's not going to be more of these. And particularly because this one is an artist proof, it's a little more dear because they only make one or maybe a small handful of artist proofs, and then they go into production. So this one's got a lot going for it. I think it's really nice. It's tall. The colors are just so great. Pilgrim Glass always was really good quality. They used 22 karat gold in the batch to get this color of cranberry, so it was more expensive when new. than the other colors. And I just really like this. There is a great book called Magic in the Mountains by Donna Meredith. And she talks all about Kelsey Murphy and Robert Bonkamp and how they crafted these lines and their history with Pilgrim glass. And it's very fascinating, really. It was quite a feat that they did this, because most production companies did not want to bother with art glass on this level because they didn't know if they had a market. It might be too expensive for their retail customers. And so Pilgrim gave her a shot, and she really did well with it. This particular piece is 14 inches tall, so it's pretty stately as well. And I am starting it at $9.99, but there is going to be a reserve on this because it is a special one-of-a-kind piece, being an artist proof. When I was driving through Idaho, I went to a funny antique store in a little town, and I said, "Oh, what's the name of your store?" And she said, "Oh, it doesn't have a name." It literally had no name, no sign, nothing, but it was near other antique shops in this little town. So she got business and traffic, and in the window I noticed she had a whole collection of Sasha Brastoff Alaskan line from the mid-50s that was created by Matthew Adams. And in the middle of it, she had this piece. And I thought, well, that doesn't really look Alaskan to me. But I bought the entire grouping. And when I got this and started looking at it, I realized that there was something special about this. First of all, it's supposed to be some sort of a tribal mask, probably African. Sasha Brastoff was a set designer. He was in a Hollywood review. He was definitely very flamboyant and like big, wild design. And this is a good example of that. Here's the Sasha B signature. If Sasha Brastoff made the piece himself, he signed it with the full signature Brastoff. If one of the people working in his factory decorated the piece, they would sign it Sasha B. It doesn't have any back stamp. And I thought, there's a story behind that, isn't there? And yes, there certainly is. Sasha Brastoff was bankrolled by a fellow, I believe by the name of Winthrop Rockefeller, who was in the Los Angeles area, had lots of money. I think he'd been an industrialist of some sort and made lots of money during the war, and thought Sasha Brastoff and his designs were really fun and interesting, and that they should come to the broader market. And in order to do that, he bankrolled Sasha Brastoff's first ceramic studio, where he worked from 1947 to 1952. The pieces made in that first factory do not have a back stamp. It ended up having to be rebuilt. And when it was rebuilt, Sasha Brastoff realized he could increase his production, because by that time, he'd been discovered and was a darling in Hollywood. Zsa Zsa Gabor bought a bunch of pieces from him. Joan Crawford had a bunch in her collection. And pretty soon, everybody in Hollywood wanted things by Sasha Brastoff. Because of that, he was able to expand his reach and mass market them and sell them all over the country. You see them all the way from Florida to New York to California. And I certainly find pieces up in Washington State. So to find something that is from the first factory is a lot harder, because after the second factory was built, they put a Sasha Brastoff logo as a back stamp. So that's how you tell the older original pieces from the first factory from the later pieces. And this one, being first factory, is a little bit more desirable. I haven't really run into this pattern very much, but I just think it's really fun. It's about 10.5 inches, so it's a nice large size. And it's modernist and yet approachable, and that's what was so fun about his wear. It's got that modern feel, but there's enough whimsy. You can mix it into a lot of different decorator interiors. This one is starting at $9.99. We're just going to see what the market thinks of it. I think because it's first factory that somebody will find that rather interesting. Another company that I have shown you before is Morecroft, but I got this really pretty cabinet vase from them. Morecroft, of course, was founded in 1897, and then Queen Mary in the 1910s and 20s became a big adherent, so the royals started buying it. Queen Elizabeth still buys pieces to put in her various castles. Because of that, Morecroft has remained in business where most of the English ceramics have gone away. It's all handmade, it's very closely controlled. The big use of color like this usually is something we consider being in the era of Walter Morecroft, who I believe was William Morecroft, the founder's son. He really brightened up the color palette around 1945. So this appears to be a mid-century piece. I'll show you the mark there. It says Morecroft and then made in England. I think it's just a beautiful piece. I always have great respect for Morecroft. The colors are rich. The quality is really good. It's got texture. So there's a lot going on with this. I'm starting it at $49. I think it could sell for double that. I have one more purse to sell this time around, and I just think this one's really cool. I picked it up like anyone would, thinking, ooh, that looks like an Enid Collins, and it certainly does. But it isn't. It is collectible, though, and it is signed, and we don't see these very often at all. So let me show you who it actually is. We will open this up. Enid Collins was in Texas, and just over the border in Matamoros, Mexico. This company did what they called una bolsa original, which is an original purse. And you can see they have all sorts of writing in there next to the mirror, decorated by hand. H. Matamoros signature there, Tampico, Mexico. The mirror's in good shape, the hinge works well, the straps are in good shape. This is a nice, clean example of one of these. And it definitely has so much design appeal. Look at that peacock, he's just so much fun. Those are all flat back rhinestones, and they are all there because if any of these fall off, they had a silver backing and you would see silver where the piece was missing. So you can always tell whether these are complete or not, and this one seems to be. Everything about it seems to be clean and works well. It's about 12 inches wide, maybe even slightly wider. It doesn't weigh a lot because it's a lightweight wood like a cigar box purse. I just think this is fun and funky and vibrant and a great addition to someone's collection, either as a shelf sitter or I think it'd be fun to wear it and take it out. It's been used. It's got a little bit. Thankfully, they were smart about only setting it on its back. So you can see it's had a little life. There's a few little scuffs. Nothing major. But it does show you that it actually is something that somebody could wear. We're going to start this one at $49. Again, I think that the value is probably close to twice that, so we will see what the marketplace thinks. You don't see many of these. I found one completed sale and one for sale on eBay. They were not as common and prolific as Enid Collins by any stretch of the imagination. Here comes something that you may have seen me get in a previous video. And because we're out of the Florida show season, and because it's such a great, unusual piece, I decided I wanted to try it on eBay. So we're gonna see if somebody who gets this. And here it is. This is it. This was made in Miami. This is just exactly 100 years old, believe it or not. Because these were made during the Florida land boom, which started just 100 years ago, was the big move of a lot of people going to Florida on vacation for the first time. And Florida was very exotic seeming because they had fish and coral and palm trees and alligators and all these things you didn't see in the north, and this amazing weather in the wintertime. And people really fell in love with it. So there was a huge land boom in Florida for about 5 or 6 years in the 1920s. And when the people came down, if they came to Miami, they would find local folks making these lamps out of coconuts and palm fronds and little sea fans. And they are to look like a fish. That's why I'm holding it sideways so that you can see those are supposed to be the eyes. And you've got fins, and he swims along, and he's got a light here in the middle of it, which works. I have had exactly 2 of these in my career. They don't come up often because they were, they weren't really fragile if you just sat them there and used them, but if you threw them in a box and were careless with moving them or shipping them, well, they'd be easy to break the parts. And this one's in really, really good condition. And that's what appealed to me about it. And so I am excited to show this. It is an absolutely funky, cool Floridiana thing, and let's get him so his face faces the same way as mine. There we go. Ready to swim into your house, if you choose. He is going to start at, I believe, $95. These typically sell for somewhere in the 130 to 150 range to someone who's a knowledgeable Floridiana collector. And the best part, it does work. It does have its original cloth cord. I want to show this to folks because some people are really afraid of these. If they put anything on, it would have been just a little cardboard thing. And yes, you can see into the plug. And that bothers people nowadays, but it's all there, it's all intact. And what I suggest to people is rather than changing the cord, plug this into a surge protector, then plug the surge protector into the wall, and you'll never have to worry about anything. Typically these work just fine, and this one does too. This next little picture that I'm going to hold up here is a tale of two countries and how technology and trade go back and forth. It's also very sweet and has a wonderful carriage design on it, which is more to the point for the person who wants to have it in their home or as a collector. But the story behind this is that these are done with a Jacquard loom, and they are done on silk. They are similar to what were called Stevens graphs. But this particular one in the corner here is signed A Perret, and it is French. The French and the English signed a treaty in 1860 where it was one of the first free trade treaties in the world. And it took a whole lot of tariffs off of trade between England and France, which made sense because they're only 30 miles apart. And France, being on the continent, was able to do certain things that English couldn't do efficiently, and vice versa. So the Free Trade Act led to the destruction of the Coventry ribbon industry because the French could make ribbon much more inexpensively. And so Thomas Stevens, who was a textile maker in Coventry, said, well, we've got to find something else to do. Let's use these Jacquard looms, which is similar to what you would use for a coverlet, and I'll make interesting multicolored silk pictures using that technology. He started off with a handful of designs. By the 1880s, there were over 900. It was a huge success. It saved the textile industry in Coventry, and it was so popular that then the French started copying it. And this is a French 1880s or 90s version of what would have been an English technology originally that was derived from French technology. So everything just sort of goes back and forth. But if you look really closely, I'll hold it up where you can really see the texture. And that, now you can see up close that yes, indeed, this is fabric. And it's very tightly woven because they used a Jacquard system to do it. So I think it's very sweet. They've got the quarters coming out of the carriage. It is approximately 7 inches by 10, and I think it would be wonderful on someone's wall. We're going to start this out around $39. I think the value is probably closer to 60 or 70, and we'll find out what the folks on eBay think about it. I will show you in the back that at one point it was sold to someone who had it framed in Long Island. These started to become very collectible about the 1920s and 30s, and that's about when the framing seems to have been done on this particular one. This next piece I'm going to show is also a true antique, and it is a true American primitive. It is, I think, a really sweet little piece. I'm going to hold it up as a set, and then I'll show you individually. But this is a toleware painted tin candle snuffer tray. So the little iron piece here is a candle snuffer, and every Victorian home had to have one because you used candlelight. This is all hand formed if you look at it closely. You can see at the hinge where the joinery is hand done. You can see how the handles are a little different from each other because a blacksmith formed them, and so they're just a little bit slightly different because they were done by hand. This would have been your snuffer to put out the candle, and this would have been the trimmer, and the little point here was if the wick fell into the wax and you had to dig it out. So these were a necessity in Victorian homes. This wasn't just optional. But the Pennsylvania Dutch and other rural people in America in the late 1700s and early 1800s caught on to the European trend of painting basic housewares to make them more appealing. And so somebody took great pains to take the tin tray, which was also formed by hand. This is about 1840, and I got it in Pennsylvania. And You can see the butterflies, which is a little unusual. Usually they were just little flowers or a design or something basic. So butterflies are unusual. You can see a little bit of the wave around the edges that was created. You can also see that it has quite a bit of wear on one side. And what this tells us, and this is part of the delightful thing with primitives, is that primitives are supposed to be worn because people actually use them. What this one is telling us is that the person who used this was right-handed, because the butterfly obviously is going to be facing up rather than down. So this is up, and all the wear is on this side because if I'm using it and I set it down, I'm going to set it down this way, and the point is going to come over here and it's going to scrape this corner. So you can tell a right-handed person used this. Had they been left-handed, the other side would be the side where the damage and wear would be from use, and that would be a left-handed one. So you know whoever had this was a right-hander. I think it's just really sweet, and I just don't run into a lot of this kind of stuff. Because these were a utility piece and because there were a lot of them done at the time, because this was something everybody had to have, they're not extraordinarily valuable, but they are definitely very collectible. And the value on these typically is somewhere in the $40 to $50 range. I will be curious to see what the market thinks of that, but I loved it when I found it because I just don't get to touch very many things that are 180 years old, and this is. Our next piece is a very beautiful vase that has a history that surrounds the West Coast that I found rather interesting. I had not heard of this company before, but some folks in Washington State asked me to sell this piece for them, and it is Strini art glass. There were a couple of clues here. First of all, it says the third decade of award-winning hand-formed glass, and it also on the inside, where they're talking about his work, says Santa Cruz, California at the bottom. Well, that was great information because Rick Strini has a rather long history as a glass blower. He started blowing glass when he was a teenager in 1964. His brother was going to community college and taking glass blowing as an elective, and he went to see him one day and was fascinated with it, so much so that he ended up persuading his parents to let him build a little glass blowing studio in the backyard of their house in California. And that's how he got started. The fact that this says starting a third decade lets us know that this piece is going to be sometime around 1990, so it is vintage, even though he is still producing and produces things that look similar to this. This one is actually older because of the fact that it was a California-made piece. He moved to Hawaii in 2000 or 2002 and has been producing there ever since. He's nearing retirement age at this point, but look at the beautiful color in this. It's just such a gorgeous, deep orange red. And then the feather pull with the luster, I find this just a really pretty piece. And of course, he was influenced, like a lot of the more modern California glass producers who started in the 60s and 70s, by what was being done in the Art Nouveau period, which was 50 to 60 years before that. And just did beautiful work, obviously influenced by the work of Tiffany. The feather pulls are really nice. This particular one is called the Tuscan coloration because it's this papaya with the red and does not have a lot of black in it. But they did various lines. They also did blues. I just think this is a gorgeous piece. He was not someone I was familiar with, so I was very grateful to the people who asked me to sell it, that they introduced me to him. I will now be looking for anything signed Strini. It does have a good aftermarket, as it should, because it's good quality. And this is a rather nice large piece, too. This one is 12.5 inches high and fans out 10 inches wide. So you could absolutely do a great floral display in this if you wanted to use it. And I believe that this one has a chance to sell again in the $175 to $225 range. I know that there's a group of YouTubers who are looking forward to going to Colorado and meeting up this summer. I also know that because of that, a whole bunch of people are looking for Van Briggle pottery because they would like to have a piece or two, and they figure, well, it's made in Colorado Springs, maybe I'll find it there. But there is another company that did pottery that started in Colorado Springs as well that is actually more obscure than Van Briggle, but very collectible. And that is Broadmoor pottery. And this is a piece of Broadmoor pottery. This is the Oxblood glaze. And this particular one, Broadmoor pottery, started in Colorado Springs in 1933 in the depths of the Depression. They were connected to a Denver company that made sewer pipe and such things. Lots of companies that started out making sewer pipe and things for houses and for construction found themselves in the Depression without customers, and nobody was building anything, and what are we going to do? And so a number of them, including Franciscan, the company that ended up creating Franciscan dinnerware, that came out of that era. They were a tile maker originally. And this company, Broadmoor Pottery, had a connection to a Denver company that made that sort of thing, the Broadmoor Pavers Company in Denver. Well, by 1937, they were running out of the clay in Colorado Springs, and they decided to move the factory to Denver. It only lasted 2 more years. So the Denver production is very short, 1937, 8, and 9 only. And P.H. Genter, who signed this piece, was one of the principals involved. There were 4 main artists who were involved with the Broadmoor pottery. I think this piece is really great. First of all, I like that it's a flower arranger, but it's also a vase, and it's all in one. So it looks just great and interesting and modernist and cool, and it could go in a deco home or a modernist interior and just be a sculptural piece as it is. But the intent of it was that you could decorate by forming flowers around this and then maybe putting something else in the center. And so it was glazed on the inside so that it could hold water. These are really nice pieces, and I have to be honest, the only other piece of Broadmoor pottery I've ever owned is the one that you see the most, which says Broadmoor on it. It's an ashtray that was made for the Broadmoor Hotel, which I believe was also, is that in Colorado Springs? I think so. In any event, it does have that Colorado tie-in. I think it's a really beautiful piece. It is a nice size. It's about 7 inches high, but it's also 7 inches round, so it's got some presence. And the price on this, we're going to start it at $59. I believe that the worth of this is probably closer to $85 to $100 because you just don't see a lot of Broadmoor, and Oxblood is one of their more popular glazes. So we'll see what Colorado pottery collectors are out there, but I think this is a great piece. Well, I was going to wear this for you and sing Born to Be Wild or some silly thing like that, but I can't stand back far enough from the camera for you to see the whole thing, so I'm just going to leave it on the hanger and show you. This is a denim jacket, but the thing that's more interesting about it is that it is a Harley Davidson embossed logo jacket. Live to ride, ride to live, Harley Davidson. The Harley Davidson logo apparel and things started coming out in the 1990s because Harley Davidson was having a huge renaissance in the 1990s. Harley is one of only 2 surviving American motorcycle makers that have been in business continuously from the beginning. They almost went out of business in the 1980s because during the 70s they really let the quality slip and the Japanese made big inroads into the motorcycle market. But in the early 80s, AMF sold them to a group of investors who understood motorcycles better than AMF did, and they got things turned around and back on the right track. And because of that, they turned Harley's bad reputation into a good reputation. However, it was a good reputation with a different group of people. Originally, Harleys were known for their choppers. They're things you would see members of motorcycle gangs driving, and it was a big tough guy thing. Well, because they didn't make good product in the 70s, they lost their cachet with that audience. So by the 80s, when they turned it around and started making better stuff, it was expensive, and they realized they had to sell to a higher end clientele. So they really stressed the cool factor of riding ride a Harley. That's the thing that makes you more interesting than the guy who rides a Yamaha or a Suzuki or something like that. And it worked, because all of a sudden a lot of older people who had maybe not really seriously, because they make big heavyweight bikes, a lot of older people who maybe hadn't seriously thought of riding a motorcycle in their younger days suddenly saw this as an opportunity to have a really great fun time cruising the countryside on a big heavy bike that would likely stay stable, low to the ground, easier to drive, and lots of power, and that was fun. So all of a sudden people who were doctors and lawyers and people with money and status started riding Harley, and that crept into the rest of the population, and then people started wanting Harley gear. This one I believe has some age because it is marked, it's a small, it is marked here, made in USA. And I've noticed from the prices of these online too, I believe that they are not in current production. And even though it's a small, I have to say, and I am a medium, it actually does fit me almost perfectly. And you can't really see that because I can't get it high enough. But and I consider myself to be a medium, and I have rather long arms. I usually take a 40 long. So I think this would fit someone a little bit bigger than a small might imply. In any event, it's cool. Harleys are cool. People who buy this stuff are definitely doing it for cool effect. And this one is in great shape. No tears, no stains, no smells, nothing wrong with it at all. And these jackets are typically selling for about $60 to $70. I'm going to start this one a little bit shy of that, and we'll just see if there's interest out there. But it's getting to that summer season of riding, and when you're on a motorcycle, I don't care how hot it is outside, you might need a denim jacket. It's windy on those things. I showed this when I was on Thrift Battle on Primetime Treasure Hunters channel. It was one of the things that helped me get through to the Final Four, which will be coming up, I believe, in August, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a really fun thing. This is an acrylic rooster, and it's quite large. I'm going to have to hold him way back here. He is almost 15 inches high. I believe he was done by the Wonder Mold company. Wonder Mold and various other acrylic makers did lots of napkin holders that were this card textured lucite back in the 1960s and 70s. They did trivets, they did all sorts of stuff, but they also did these wall plaques, and this size is hard to get. I found a stack of these in an antique store in Spokane, Washington, and this one was in the best condition of all of them, so I thought I would put it online. One thing to be careful with if you're seeing these out in the marketplace is right here. Look from the side. You can see there's layers of different color. There's the base layer, and then they would layer colors on top. So you've got red over green over amber. Well, on the feet, it's just one color. So this is the thinnest part of the piece right here. And unfortunately, because these are a little bit heavy and they're kind of big, I've watched lots of people pick them up by the feet and have the thing snap off under its own weight because they're not made to be held by the feet. That's the weakest part. So finding these intact is the important part. You really want to look and make sure that someone hasn't super glued. And you can tell on this one that it hasn't. This would have been the label originally, and again, I'm pretty sure it's Wonder Mold. I know other companies did do this stuff, but this is all that's left of the label, and it was not any better on the other two. So I'm left to surmise that it was them because it seems the most similar to their other work. They did a little bit brighter, a little bit louder, a little bit more modern design. They were a little bit heavier. They were a little better quality. There were outfits in Florida and other places in California, and I'm sure other places around the country that made this sort of wear, but this was the good quality stuff at the time, and it still is. I was really surprised to see one of these, actually a couple of these, at different points on eBay selling somewhere in the $125 to $135 range. I'm not starting mine anywhere near that high because I got a good deal. I don't have to get that much, but we'll see whether the market takes it there. I think he's just fun, and people really do love roosters. It is just the universal kitchen theme that never seems to get tired for people, and I know I like them. I like them a lot better in kitchens than I do in real life. I find them very disturbing at the crack of dawn in real life. So our last items 18, 19, and 20. I don't usually group things like this, but they're all related and they all tell a story. So I'm going to show you all of them at once, and then we'll talk a little about the story. They are all American silver coins, and these are in wonderful condition. And we're going to talk about all three of them because they are actually interrelated, and they're some of the most beautiful American coin designs and most collectible coin designs ever made. Let's start with this one. This is a Morgan dollar. Morgan was a gentleman who was a sculptor who was asked to design this coin in 1878, which is when they came out. And we think of coins as being something that, well, they just crank them out and they don't use precious metals and it's no big deal, and they can just make as many as the banks need or the Federal Reserve wants, and there's no problem. But back in the 1880s, there was a huge political movement by the free silver people, and what the free silver people, who were representing mining interests, wanted was the notion of free silver, where anytime they mined silver, they could go to the mint and make the mint buy their silver and turn it into a coin for them. The United States government did not want to do that. They wanted to control how many coins were made, and so they passed an act that said that they would be making a certain number of coins and that they would make dollars. And so they came up with the Morgan dollar. And it was a big success. It's a big, beautiful coin. It was nicely sculpted. It, by law, had to have an eagle on the back, and the front had to be some representation in female form of liberty. And so you see liberty on her crown. This was a real person. The woman who posed for this was a woman named Anna Willis Williams. She really didn't want to model for it, but Morgan knew her and thought she would be perfect for it, that she had the most amazing profile, and so he used her profile as the basis for this coin. When the coin was issued and they found out who she was, she started getting thousands of letters from people, and it was actually quite disturbing to her, apparently. She really hated the notoriety that came with having posed for this coin, but she's sure famous now, and it has outlasted her lifetime because it's still one of the most collectible coins they are. Now, this one appears to be in an uncirculated condition, meaning that it was not ever touched by human hands. It's got a little bit of toning at the top, probably from air seeping into the mount, causing a little bit of tarnish up there. But it does not look like it was ever circulated. It probably sat in a bank vault for a long time. These two were designed in 1916. In the orange, you have the Liberty Walking Half Dollar, which is just a beautiful coin and a rather complex design. And as you can imagine, all that fine detail wore away pretty quickly. So finding it in uncirculated condition, as this one is with this nice satin finish, is rather a trick. The new head of the mint misinterpreted Congress's edict and thought that he was required by law to redesign coins every 25 years rather than just given the option. So he thought he had to come up with new coin designs. He hired Adolph Weinman. Weinman came up with this really beautiful design, and it was complicated. The mint superintendent hated it because it was hard to get a good strike and get all the details in, but make them they did. They kept making them until 1948, when she was replaced by Benjamin Franklin on the half dollar in a much simpler design. This one is also in uncirculated condition, and I have to admit, when I first got these, I was thinking of having them sent off and graded because they would have sold for more, and I felt that they would have sold for a lot more. After I had a coin dealer look at them, he said that they are in very nice uncirculated condition, but that they were not top of the shelf. So we're going to price them and sell them as they are and not spend the money on having them graded or take the time to ship them out to do that, which is rather time consuming. The third one was by another sculptor named Herman Atkins McNeil, and this one has an interesting story because this one is a standing Liberty. Again, Liberty had to be on the front and an eagle had to be on the back, and there's your eagle. This sold for $10 in 1968. It should be worth about 3 or 4 times that much now. This one was quite controversial because it also was very hard to strike, and this one actually, the details wore out quicker than almost any other coin in American history. And so this one did not stay in production very long. They only made it for about 15 years, but she is a beauty, and when you can get them in this condition and see the detail, you realize how special they were. The reason that she's holding the shield and looking to one side is because this is coming out right before we enter World War I, and this was basically a message to Europe saying, we're watching you and we have our shields up. Originally, her breast was bare, and then they redesigned it and put chainmail on it. I was always under the impression that that was because of prudishness in the time, but actually it was because they wanted her to seem more armed because we entered the First World War in 1916. So it was basically a message to the Europeans that we are going to defend ourselves. This is a wonderful eagle on the back. The details are really nice on this one, and because of that, it should probably sell somewhere in the $30 to $40 range. I just like to show coins because it's a personal passion of mine. They do have some intrinsic value because of the metal, but they're also really beautiful, and they have a good story behind them, and that's what led me to be interested in them. And so I thought I would share that with you. And now we're going to share all these things with you because they are all listed on eBay as of the end of this video. You are welcome to go check out the links in the description below, and you'll be able to link to these items to see how they're doing. And if you're interested in them, you are of course welcome to bid. I'm happy to send to viewers. I always get a kick out of it when a viewer gets something as opposed to someone that I don't know. It's just more fun for me. It's more personal. And I love this connection that we have with all you folks, because we really get to, you know, it's not so anonymous. I really enjoy that with the social media. It's very different than I thought it would be, and I'm very grateful that I have gone this direction and get to participate with you in all of this. In the meantime, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Thank you so much for watching this, and have fun watching how these things do on eBay, and you'll either learn something about the market or find something that you might like to own. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community, here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.